Good afternoon, Ben Lowe, as David said, Senior Project Manager at Roland Berger. I'll introduce the firm a little bit later. Have done a lot of work on energy storage, really over the last 5 years, which for this industry is not a very long time, but for the storage industry feels like a lifetime. Really excited to have Aram, Brett, Michael, and Tom on this panel. What we're going to try to do is, after everyone introduce their companies and technologies, not necessarily try to talk about long duration energy storage in the abstract, but try to hone it in a little bit more to the Carolinas and just some of the kind of, situation on the ground, particularly as Duke Energy looks to decarbonize over the next 10, 15 years, and really try to, not only leverage renewable resources, but obviously provide it in a safe, clean, affordable manner. And so we'll get to that in a minute. But first, I'd like to just go through the panel for some brief introductions, starting with Aram from ESS. So Aram, if you wanted to introduce yourself and your company.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I'm wondering if I can share the screen here. So I will pull this up and just let me know if you all can see here. Aram Zamgochin, Senior Director for Strategic Partnerships at ESS Inc. I'm really pleased to be with you all today. Ben, looking forward to this panel, and I'm happy to give a quick introduction on who we are and where we fit into the broader energy storage ecosystem. So I thought it might be fun to just start with a brief video rather than just listening to me speak and roll through a bunch of slides. So I'll start with this.
Thank you, Aram. Anything else you wanted to conclude with before we introduce our next panelist?
Nope, happy to leave it there and look forward to diving into the discussion. Thanks so much, Ben.
Great, thanks, Aram. Now I wanted to introduce Brett Simon from Eos Energy. Brett?
Hey, everybody. Brett Simon from Eos Energy Enterprises here. If I can share my screen, I have a short slide deck I'd love to walk people through. So very quickly, Eos Energy Storage is a public company. We have a zinc-based battery storage solution. Our company was founded in 2008, and today we have over 200 members on our team. And we're, a long duration technology. That's why we're on this panel, optimized for 4+ hour storage. Given that we're a zinc-based chemistry, we don't require any rare earth elements. It's a simple solution with zinc bromide, titanium, plastic, really just abundant materials that are fully recyclable at end of life. We're a non-flammable, non-toxic solution as well. We've actually gone through UL 9540A and come out with flying colors, so that's a really big feather in our cap. We are a technology that's designed and manufactured in the USA. We have a factory right outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in a town called Turtle Creek. And we are currently scaling up to gigawatt hour production with that facility. Just quickly about our chemistry, it's a very robust and simple solution. So our solution involves plating zinc onto a titanium anode and then deplating it as we discharge. And this allows us to have a solution that has very high performance and very low degradation. So we're a very long life solution. And you can see here just one of the pictures from our factory with some of the zinc plating going on. We have a global portfolio with a US concentration. We have systems that have been installed and also contracted all over the world for a variety of use cases. We've done projects with utilities, we've done projects with developers, IPPs. We have a system at a wastewater treatment plant right here in New Jersey. So all very exciting stuff. And here's just some highlights from our earnings call that just happened earlier this week. So, we've discharged for over 2.2 million cycles. Year to date, we've booked $137 million, which represents 561 megawatt hours. And our backlog is over 600 megawatt hours. So, really, we've been growing very rapidly in the year since we've been public. We went public last November. So very exciting times for our company to be scaling up. And just quickly to just give a flash from how that pipeline shakes out, or how that backlog shakes out rather. Majority of it is front of the meter systems, probably not surprising anyone. And much of that involves either renewable integration or T&D deferral / locational capacity. Again, as we're working with a lot of these larger scale projects for IPPs, developers, and utilities. So that's all I wanted to share today. Thanks so much, everyone, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Great, thanks, Brett. Now I wanted to please introduce Michael Lonen from the National Renewables Cooperative Association. Michael?
Thanks, Ben. Sorry, folks, no slideshow. We're pretty straight ahead outfit. So National Renewables Cooperative is owned by about 23 rural electric wholesale cooperatives around the U.S. That's the tie-in we have, obviously, with NCEMC. We were created about a dozen years ago. And for those of you that know ACES Power Marketing, we're housed in the same building on the northwest side of Indianapolis. So ACES is about 250 people. NERCO is much smaller. We're 6. And really, we were set up just to go after wind, battery, and solar technology. So really, we have 2 main purposes. We do a lot of RFPs, a lot of PPAs, a lot of self-build, ownership, tax equity flips, all the way from, say, 250 kW solar to 250 megawatt solar. And then with our owners, we spend a lot of time looking at technology, researching, and trying to figure out where we're going. So this conference is really interesting. There are topics we spend a lot of time banding about with our owners, and we're glad to be able to participate. Thanks, Ben.
Great, thanks, Michael. And then lastly, my good friend Tom Fenmore from Duke Energy in their Enterprise Technology Office. Tom?
Yeah, good afternoon, Ben. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity. Tom Fenmore with Duke Energy. I head up our Emerging Technology Office. Just a couple of slides here to kind of level set where Duke Energy is in this journey on long duration storage. The road to net zero carbon, which is before us, is one that Duke Energy is committed to be net zero carbon by 2050. And really, we're seeing that that's being accelerated at the state level. And here in the Carolinas recently, with House bills being passed, we're being asked to retire assets sooner, coal plants and other generation units, fossil generation units sooner. And we really see the need to accelerate our storage deployments. And those storage deployments are going to have to start looking much bigger than what we've been working with in the past, in order to integrate the renewables that are going to be deployed and also offset some of the losses that we've got regarding, the ability to flex the muscles of the fossil plants, which can react relatively quickly some of our baseload nuclear. So we've got a journey in front of us. We've got a team formed internally that is actively looking at the technologies that we can deploy realistically, working with folks like EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, and then actively testing technologies ourselves at our Mount Holly microgrid facility, where we will be testing an Eos battery in 2022-2023 timeframe, and then also a Honeywell flow battery. You may have seen an announcement to test a Honeywell flow battery in the 2023 timeframe. However, we've got a lot of work going on in these other technologies as well, looking at some of the larger kind of plant scale technologies that you see listed here. You know, things like pumped hydro. Duke has a lot of that in the western side of our North Carolina footprint, but on the eastern side of the state, we don't have pumped hydro available to absorb a lot of the afternoon solar that we've got now, and we're actually curtailing solar plants on the eastern side of North Carolina. So we have plenty of opportunity for deployment of large-scale, long-duration storage as we go forward, and we're figuring that out and working with our folks internally across the board, generation, transmission, distribution, and our regulated renewables planning folks to figure out what that might look like going forward. But as you can see here, the concentration, and this slide was compliments of EPRI, is one where, you know, we're looking at a mix of technologies. We really feel that going forward, we're going to have a lot of tools in the toolbox to meet the requirements that are before us in order to make, you know, this road to net zero carbon possible, and also this deployment of storage technologies. We're not betting on a single technology to get us there. We really think it's going to be a mix of technologies going forward. So look forward to more conversation this afternoon and following up with folks as we can going forward. So thank you. Back to you, Ben.
Great, thanks, Tom. And I'll ask you actually to keep your pages handy, Tom, because I think it'll be some of the pages, particularly the one before this, where we look at technologies and duration, I think will be very useful. And so I'll lead us through more of a kind of setting the stage case study of which you've already previewed, which is great. And then I think we can come back to this, Tom, to really kind of bring in Aram, Brett, and then Michael as well. So
absolutely.
I think this is shaping up to be, honestly, a lot of fun and really interesting, and, you know, hoping that we, you know, make the most of this Friday afternoon. So here we go. And again, I usually use a different web conferencing service, so please just forgive the student driving. Please let me know if you guys can see my screen, and we'll get started.
Yeah, I see it, Ben.
Great, thank you. So as David mentioned, I'm a senior project manager at Roland Berger, formerly of Duke Energy, where I worked for about 6 or 7 years on a lot of strategic issues. You know, left in 2016, laid the groundwork for some of the kind of output of this most recent energy law, particularly as it applies to multi-year rate plans. But you know, this was also the year the very first Tesla Powerwall came out, and so it was a very different era. From Duke, I went to Alevo, which was an attempt at a startup battery company in Concord. I became their policy director and got very involved in House Bill 589. And then as Alevo blew up or went defunct, I turned to consulting, and I really continued on the energy storage and battery strategy path. Roland Berger, you know, just for you all to know, is a multinational consulting firm, small in the U.S., but, you know, large ambitions, about 130 consultants. And we do a lot of work on the energy transition. You know, the Lazard levelized cost of storage may be a survey you're familiar with. It has very quickly become, you know, not just the standard here in the U.S., but even around the world. And so I have led, you know, interviews and data gathering for that for each of the last 3 years, and have really kind of built up a really interesting view into how storage works and what is now versus what's happening in the future. We're here to talk about, long duration storage. And I just thought it would be helpful to just talk about, well, as Tom alluded to earlier, what exactly are we talking about? What kind of technologies are there? What are some of the pros and cons? And, we'll certainly get into those as we go. In general, we see three categories, flow batteries, thermal storage technologies, really relying on latent heat or phase change. And then also mechanical technologies, and these are those that kind of store it as gravitational, kinetic, or even as kind of compressed air. I have examples here in the second line, between EASS and EOS. I think that they're very much in the kind of flow battery category here, and then we can talk about that. Some of the advantages that I'm sure that we'll point out is the lack of degradation, cycling, safety, and modularity. Some of the challenges with flow batteries, at least based on our research, has been, just in terms of maintenance, round trip efficiency can be an issue, but less so at larger size projects. And then really just kind of developing manufacturing scale. If you think about the head start that the lithium-ion battery has as a result of OEMs. Thermal and mechanical, we don't really have representatives here for that. But again, concerns about energy density, safety, and some cryogenic technologies and lots of modularity. And then for mechanical, those just require enormous footprints sometimes. It can be difficult to modularize, and just because they are such a long duration technology, obviously, they don't cycle a whole lot. I think the key thing here, though, and the reason why we're here on this conversation is you can see as you get to longer storage durations past 4 hours, as you recall on Tom's chart, lithium ion is just not necessarily competitive, right? And here we're looking at two breeds of lithium ion phosphate, largely manufactured in China, and then lithium ion nickel manganese cobalt, that's a mouthful. And then those are the Samsung LG Chem battery varieties. And so you can see naturally at a 6 hour duration, flow can be more cost competitive. And then as you get out to 10 hours and minimum efficient scales, you're also introducing, for example, pump storage hydrogen, compressed air as well. And so again, the point here isn't necessarily to look at the actual numbers. We've obviously redacted those, but to really think about, as we get to these longer duration needs, past 4 hours, thinking about the cost and thinking how that kind of opens up a new kind of portfolio of technologies. And then the question is, well, why is long duration storage important? And it's important because in a lot of areas, we have so much renewable energy that we just have to curtail it, and we have to curtail it for reliability reasons. And so when you hear curtailment, all you're doing is basically throwing out otherwise free energy. And so this is, an initial look of what's happening in the Midwest and kind of, Southern Power Pool, MISO, ERCOT, heavily kind of, wind areas, and then CAISO, which is wind, but also mostly solar. And again, it's just, as Tom will tell you, it's one thing to have renewable energy, it's quite another to be able to deliver it. And so how can long duration be, part of a solution to address that? When we talk about, the duck curve, and I'm sure that's something you've probably heard of, notably in California, what we're really talking about here is this concept of net generation, net load. And you can see if we look at kind of a PJM example where, in places like Virginia and elsewhere, there's just boatloads of solar coming on, exactly what that looks like and what you're dealing with as a grid operator, where you'll have generation running, up to about 9-10 a.m. Then you'll have solar, and then you've got to ramp like crazy. And when Tom starts talking about curtailment in the eastern part of their service territory here, he's talking about all of this solar, about 30% of peak, based on our estimates, without really being able to do much of anything with it. Tom, can you tell me where Bad Creek and I forget the other pump storage facilities. Are those both in South Carolina or are those
Yeah,
elsewhere?
they're right on the border of South Carolina and North Carolina over towards the western part of the state.
Got it.
So that the northwestern part of South Carolina. So how's that?
Got it. And so, you know, you have the solar here, like you were talking about. You don't really have the transmission, and there's a whole bunch of other reasons why you can't really, shift the power over to the west. And so, you know, as you were saying earlier, you're trying to, or you're having to curtail here in the eastern part of the service territory. Is that right? Do I have that kind of generally correct?
That's correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Any other commentary or observations you want to share here, Tom? We can keep going.
No, keep going. I think we're on track. Right.
Cool. And so, you know, we talked about where solar was, you know, is presently in the east and western part of Duke's service territory. And now you can see, you know, what's to come, I guess, is what I would say. And these are, you know, cumulative gigawatt installations from the 2020 modified IRP. So this is the one I think that just came out in the spring, at least South Carolina, after a lot of discussion. And you can see just the incredible amount of solar coming and the incredible challenges Tom and his colleagues are going to have, and even just managing this, which I think is really interesting. You can see obviously that, you know, where we stand today, it's gas, coal, nuclear, and then other. Coal, as Tom mentioned, is largely going away. And we're looking not just obviously at solar, but storage, you know, including hybrid resources. This gas capacity question actually is really important, especially if you think about reliability, right? Because your gas power plants are often your most flexible. They can turn on, they can ramp very quickly. The challenge is you need gas capacity, you need gas to be delivered, as you know, to actually run these plants. And the really interesting thing here is how Duke will think about its IRP and its requirements for reliability, knowing that, you know, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, as we know, was envisioned but now long gone, and Mountain Valley, you know, there's still a lot of questions about it. And so, you know, I think that the place where we can start is, you know, with Tom, and then we'll get to the rest of the panel, is, you know, how do you think about, you know, capacity requirements? How do you think about this kind of symphony, as we heard earlier, that we need to kind of put together and organize? And then where does long duration fit in all of that? And we'll just go from there.
So I guess that was a question for me, Ben, to kind of lead off, right?
Yeah, and your ability to speak on behalf of all of Duke Energy, yes.
Yeah. So in Tom's view of the world on Friday afternoon. So
Right.
yeah. So yeah, actually, as I had mentioned, you know, obviously we've got folks that are looking at this very, very intently on a day-to-day basis, and we're working with our planning folks. We're working with our generation, our transmission, and distribution planners to figure out, you know, what the right mix of these assets is going to be going forward. In addition to that, we have an energy storage technology team that is looking at the individual technologies to understand when these technologies can actually scale to the levels that we're going to need them to scale at. So we've really got a couple of challenges in front of us. One of them is, you know, siting the assets so that they'll make the best use of the assets on a continuous basis, because our expected lifetime for deployment of these assets is in the 10 to 20 year time frame. And one of the challenges we have there is, and I think all utilities face this, not just Duke, is by the time you get the asset deployed, does the initial use case that you defined for that asset still exist, right? Is that primary financial justification to deploy that asset, is that still as solid as the day that you developed your plan to deploy that asset? Because a lot of things change in the market. Duke Energy is not the only one that deploys generation assets in the market today. We've got developers, we've got, you know, folks that want to put solar on their rooftop. and other people coming into the generation space who can influence, you know, what the flow of electricity can look like on the grid. In addition to that, you know, we're being challenged by having gigawatt scale storage technology available that can be deployed in the next few years. So, you know, a lot of what is being deployed today is at the, you know, megawatt scale. Even the larger systems in California and Australia and around the world that we've seen today are primarily lithium-ion based systems that may have been built out, but they're still running 3, 4, 5, 600 megawatt scale projects, which is a big project in and of itself. But when you start to talk about shutting down power plants that are, you know, 1,500 megawatts or 2,000 megawatts in scale and replacing that with some type of energy storage asset, or at least partially offsetting that with some type of storage asset, it's kind of a challenge right now to find any one storage technology that really stands out that is readily available commercially to scale. So, you know, we meet weekly, every other week, you know, to continuously track this. And, you know, I'd love to say we've got a crystal ball right now to get us there, but it's going to be a journey. We're not ready to, you know, rest our case on a single technology at this point. You know, going back to my original statement, I think it's going to take a mix of technologies to get us where we need to go.
Thank you, Tom. We'll go to Michael for the cooperative view, and then Brett and to just talk about their technology, talk about how they approach how they might think about this market in a moment. But Michael, if you want to just give us the, you know, same foundational view that Tom provided for Duke, you know, on behalf of the cooperatives, or even talk about how cooperatives think about this, that would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah, we think just like Tom. So there you go. Pretty much everything he said is spot on. I mean, we're both, you know, large load serving entities. I mean, Duke's a giant. The co-ops we represent are about, I don't know, 40 to 50 gigawatts of generation. So it's a fairly good chunk of the US market. And exactly what Tom said, I mean, everyone's getting pretty excited because they're putting in little, you know, Tesla power packs and stuff like that. But the scale, I think often people are not addressing or don't understand. I mean, if you wanted to buy a lot of lithium-ion batteries or a lot of flow batteries that are just coming to the market today, you would overwhelm ESS and Lockheed Martin's not even to market yet, and Form Energy and Energy Vault, all these companies, they're all going at gangbuster pace to provide this technology, but we're a long ways on this journey. So just the co-op view, I mean, we look a lot like the major utilities. I don't know if you can see my slide, but if you look at all the NERCO owners, we're about 70% baseload coal and natural gas. So those are all pretty heavy emitters of carbon. And obviously the move is towards net zero and then low carbon, perhaps. Bill was arguing this morning, I think for 2050, we got to be carbon zero in the power sector. So that, as Tom pointed out, it's kind of a gigantic lift. And then to echo his comment on, you know, how are you viewing this? Certainly NERCO and its members are looking across the technologies, trying to get our minds around them and realizing it's kind of like a Swiss Army knife. We're going to need a lot of different technologies just within the battery sphere. It's going to be a lot more than lithium ion. And this conference is really apropos. It's kind of like what we had in the slide. So just a couple quick slides on how we think about it. Most load serving entities always are thinking about.
Michael, just a heads up, we can't see your pages. So if you could please just double check that. It threw me off too. I'm usually on Teams, so this is like a new language for me.
Try it again. Is it showing up now? It's giving me a share dialog box.
There we go.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, we left WebEx about a year ago, so I apologize. I probably had to hit the pop-up. So you can see that gaudy colored slice of load slide.
Yeah, and if you want to go full screen as well on that, you can. So presenter view.
How about that?
Wonderful, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so this is, you know, to really drill in what we think the biggest problem is. I'll just talk quickly in a few slides about lithium-ion, its limitations, and the fact that it's a very good system. But we're especially worried out when we look out through 2035. We're looking at 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. This might be a different view for many people in the market, but we think if we go low carbon, That's where all the trouble lies. So right now, that's obviously the most inexpensively priced market hours in most RTOs. We've got a lot of excess baseload coal and natural gas, a lot of CTs that don't operate more than maybe 5% CF on the year. If those units are largely retired the next 10 to 20 years, I think the real question is, what in the world is going to supply the market at about 9, 10 p.m. when the lithium-ion batteries are tapped out? They've done their work. They've handled the ramp, probably with flow. And just think to the Texas ice storm event and what happened in ERCOT. When you shut everything down, you go overnight and there's no solar, you typically don't have a lot of generating resources. So Eos and ESS and all these companies, they are really moving quickly to try and provide a solution. But we think that's going to be a very heavy lift. And it doesn't get a lot of play. Most people are talking about duck curves and lots of solar generation. But I suspect the action is going to happen in the overnight, early morning hours when often, by the way, the wind doesn't perform. We've got a lot of wind generation. So just very quickly, other speakers have touched on this. Lithium-ion is a great technology, but it can only do so many things. And one thing it can't do is get its duration easily beyond 5 or 6 hours. And the solution is not to double or triple build lithium-ion batteries. The other one that doesn't get a lot of play, but since I'm a Canuck and I spent a lot of time in the mining sector up north, everybody, Bloomberg, Woodmac, they all talk, that we're going to build all these mines and get all these trace minerals from around the world and build these beautiful Tesla batteries. And every time I see the study, I just start laughing my head off. If you have any knowledge about how difficult it is to site and permit a mine and the amount of carbon that has to go into extracting the ore and then processing it and getting it to the market, it is a very, very intensive process. And a lot of countries that own the minerals we're after don't particularly like us. So there are a host of national security concerns. One of the speakers already touched on it. I think it was Brett, pointing out that one of the real upsides to flow and long duration in general is the fact that it has very simple chemistry. And it has chemistry that the U.S. can supply, things like zinc, lead, iron, water and stuff like that. It's not all these trace minerals like manganese, cobalt, lithium, graphite, all these kind of things. So when you start reading all these surveys about how fast we're all going to adopt lithium-ion batteries, I really encourage you to step back and think about, in the appendix, I show a Bloomberg study that shows that we're going to increase the amount of minerals we mine to produce batteries. In the next 10 years, we're going to increase it by a factor of 10. Those are order of magnitude numbers, 10 to 20 times to create all these EV batteries and these batteries for power storage. That is going to be a massive lift. Personally, I don't think it's going to happen. There's just no way. Even if the countries who had the resources were game, that's a race against time. So that leads us to kind of flow. And we think flow is pretty amazing. There's a lot of different technologies. I just put a couple of notes on Redex technology, but there are many technologies. There are many companies that have very, very interesting ideas. This technology, in many cases, has been around for 50, 60 years. We're doing our best to try and meet with all the vendors of these products. And probably what Tom is doing as well. We're trying to understand the technology. We're trying to figure out how in the world we're going to keep the lights on once the sun goes down. The problem that flow has is not the technology. I think it's going to actually work out really, really well. It's like some of the speakers this morning were kind of like a Silicon Valley part 2. A lot of venture capital, a lot of interest. I think the technology problem is the least of our worries. On the flow world, I'm much more worried about how we handle shutting down gas and baseload coal and how we ramp up flow. Some of the things that the other speakers have touched on. That's going to be a very complicated process. We're essentially, to use a nautical metaphor, I guess, imagine you jump out in the ocean, right? You're up in the Pacific on the sailboat, and you start stripping that sailboat down, ripping all the boards out, the keel out, the rudder, the whole schmear, bring the sails down. You try and rebuild that ship mid-ocean. That's what we're trying to do with our power grid and our transmission grid. And, I guess our biggest hope is that we take our time and do this carefully because it's trillions of dollars of assets. It's very, very complicated. You can already see in California, they're looking at their huge nuclear Diablo Canyon, their 4 big combined cycles, and I'm not sure that they should shut them down as quickly as they thought. That's a good thought. And Europe's got a mess on the hands, and we haven't even really got renewable penetration to levels people think we should do quickly. So there's a dramatic clash here in terms of public opinion, and obviously the cooperatives and the load-serving utilities, we're in the middle of it. We're trying to adapt to the new reality as quick as possible. But like Tom said, it's difficult. We're just not entirely sure what the target is and what mountaintop we're aiming for here. But we're trying to watch the technologies and not overspend. So I think there's a lot of room for multi-day storage. There's going to be a ton of demand for flow, especially the stuff that works well from 6 to 12 hours, because lithium can't do it all. So that's very quickly, that's sort of our take on this rapid Wild West battery energy storage technology market.
Got it. And no pressure to either of you, because if the lights don't stay on, well, look out. So
That's right. I'll come to your basement, Ben. We'll hang out together.
Tom, if you could please go back to the page you had showing the technologies by duration. And I was going to next go to Arm and Brett to just ask them, to reflect on what they've heard from both of you. Ask them, their opinions of what they're seeing, and then talk about their own technology, how they think about it in that regard. And then also maybe just paint a picture, positioning the Southeast here against other conversations they're having in other geographies, with other utilities. So Arm, why don't you go first, and then Brett?
Sure, be happy to. Really informative, and I'm just going to bring back up a slide here. So sorry, Tom. I'm sorry. We've moved on from WebEx as well, so it's a bit of a chore for us too. But let's level set and talk about how we define long duration energy storage. I think broadly speaking, we can put it into three categories. One, and we've covered this, shifting supply to meet demand, and that certainly requires more than 4 hours and up to 12 hours at rated power. So what we're really talking about here is storing that excess renewable production and shifting that energy to when it has the greatest economic value, to avoid the curtailments that we've talked about and get the greatest possible economic benefit from renewable assets. Our own modeling has indicated that long duration energy storage can really present and open an opportunity for replacing costly and polluting peaker plants, but you need something to replace them with, right? We talked about California, and that's certainly an interesting case study in terms of how maybe not to go for the rest of the country in one fell swoop. We are developing platforms that could certainly provide the duration up to 12 hours at rated power and the capacity to help our customers green up, if you will, their resource mix by augmenting fossil fuel-based peaking plants. And then finally, grid stability, which we've talked about. And, that leads us into the why. Why long duration energy storage? And I think the other panelists have touched on this. One, whether it be the mandates, consumer preferences, or a general corporate desire to stabilize the grid and enable increased penetration of renewables upwards to 100% eventually, you're going to need an alternative, a cost-effective, safe, clean, long asset to replace those peakers. And then finally, from the national security and the resiliency standpoint, we're seeing a lot of growth in proliferation of microgrids, particularly throughout the state of California, where in many cases these are mandated as part of wildfire mitigation programs to address the very real issue of public safety power shutoffs.
Arm, are you still there, or did we lose you?
I'm still here, but I've yielded the screen, Ben.
Okay. Two questions really for you, Arm, right? So it's actually interesting. I've been on both sides of this panel, right? I've worked at Duke. I've been at a startup for storage. How do you, as a flow battery technology company, you don't have a complementary industry like lithium has for OEMs to scale and drive out costs? I mean, how do you as a company kind of reach critical mass to get to manufacturing efficiencies, and then how do you create credibility in the market to get folks like Tom and Michael to say, yes, this is the answer, and it's Tom and Michael's kind of butts on the line for keep it G-rated, to keep the lights on, right? So
Sure.
there's
Very fair
technology
questions.
risk here, right?
Very fair questions. Like our friends at Eos, we are also a listed company on the New York Stock Exchange, trading under the ticker symbol GWH. The net cash from that transaction is almost exclusively going to be directed to scaling manufacturing, specifically increasing our manufacturing capacity from 250 megawatt hours per annum to 16 gigawatt hours per annum by 2025. I think what's interesting about the build or manufacturing, if you will, of our systems is that it's not as complicated or intensive as building lithium-ion batteries, right? I would picture more of a washing machine assembly line. I think one of the breakthroughs that we achieved in terms of our manufacturing process is developing a fully automated, fully epoxied manufacturing process for our battery modules. And that really addressed a lot of the earlier issues with earlier flow battery technologies surrounding leaking. We've addressed that issue. In terms of lending confidence to folks like our friends at Duke Energy, we've had a couple of recent announcements that have been disclosed, not just to the markets, but to the press, including a framework agreement with SB Energy, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of SoftBank Group, to deploy commercially 2 gigawatt hours of ESS batteries through 2026. We view that as a milestone announcement, certainly caught the Department of Energy's attention, as well as others. So I really think the time is now to move beyond what I would call death by test bed, death by study, and really look at where major utility scale solar developers are going. They have done their assessments, conducted their analysis, and I think the results speak for themselves, and you're going to see more of that, I think, from all of us in this space in the months and years ahead.
Cool. Thank you, Arm. Brett, so maybe, I mean, you heard what Arm said about ESS. Maybe the EOS view would be helpful. And as you kind of gently pointed out, I may have mischaracterized the kind of, application of your battery. So if you want to go through the same kind of thought process, Brett, and then we'll get back to more questions.
Yeah, sure. So I think broadly, one thing, yeah, I'll reiterate is that EOS is not a flow battery. So we are a long duration zinc-based technology, and often folks think we're a flow battery, but we're actually more akin in terms of the way we operate to a sealed lead acid battery. But all that said, I think there have been some really solid points made. I think Aram really hit the nail on the head with the application of this technology. And I think something important to note is that long duration needs are not far away in many cases. So, not too long ago, I think it was earlier this year, the CPUC did a study in California saying how much long duration storage will California need by 2030. And the conclusion was that California would need 1 gigawatt of 8+ hour storage by 2030. Only a few months later, Stratogen did a study and found that actually that need would be by 2026. So, obviously that's California. It's a different case than the Carolinas, but nevertheless, we're still seeing as renewable penetrations grow that there really is going to be this continuing need for longer duration solutions to ensure that we have a stable, flexible, and resilient grid. I think a lot of really good points have been made too, as well, on the manufacturing and supply chain. I think one thing I haven't heard discussed yet as well is not just the availability of materials or the ease of procuring materials. We've also talked about some of the geopolitics, but another piece is also the ethics of supply chain, which is something that I think doesn't really get talked about enough. Where additionally, when you are sourcing certain minerals globally, sometimes there are ethical concerns. This figure might be a little bit out of date, but a few years ago, I remember hearing discussed multiple times that if you look at cobalt extraction from the Congo, at least 20% of it can be traced to what the mining industry likes to call artisanal mines, which is a very fancy way of saying either forced labor or labor that involves children. And when you look at the DRC supplying 50% of the world's cobalt, you're looking at something like 10% of the world's cobalt being tied to human rights abuses. So that's something else that we need to consider, the ethics of the work that we do. These are, when we're sourcing from more, sustainable, reliable types of suppliers, we also have those types of implications that we need to be aware of.
And Ben, if I can just jump in, I really want to amplify what Brett just said, because I think that's so critical. And this is an area where I think both of our companies really shine. At least for ESS, what fuels our battery are non-rare earth, very readily available substances, science grade iron, salt, and water. We can source that from anywhere. Obviously, for projects in the US, we're sourcing that from here. I think the reference to the supply chain is also very important. All right. At ESS, as I know at EOS as well, we hire American and we buy American. And if you look at the trajectory of the incentives that Congress is talking about, particularly what's in the House version of the budget reconciliation bill, I think our friends at Duke, as well as other utilities, are going to take a look at the proposed tax incentives with domestic content bonus provisions, with Davis-Bacon Act, Fair Labor Standard provisions, et cetera. And they may confront a universe where they're looking at direct pay options approaching 50% in terms of an investment tax credit for buying American stationary batteries for our grid.
Cool. No, Arm, this is great. And just so the audience knows, based, like I said, we've done a levelized cost of storage interviews for the past 5 years or so, 3 years I've been doing it. And anytime you get two flow battery guys in a room or alternative battery guys in a room, it inevitably turns to beating up on lithium ion. And so here we are.
Well, I actually don't want to do that. I actually think there's a place in the universe, Ben, for lithium, right? And again, if you look at the incentives that Congress is taking a look at, all right, the incentives for lithium ion are going to be to build batteries, hopefully in America, but batteries that fit in your Tesla and your Nissan. And that's a perfect application for them.
Yeah, no, I just joking around a little bit, Arm. I appreciate that. I think just to give a sense of, what, folks were saying earlier about, how are lithium ion batteries used. This is our own forecast over, out to 2030. You can see that stationary storage kind of aspires to be rounding error in all of the capacity being built, for autos and OEMs. And I think even, getting to 2030 might be a bit of a hope and a dream, because we can think by our own estimates, the middle part of this decade, we're seeing a potential real supply and demand issue that's been brought up. And obviously cobalt does not come from the friendliest places, and there are a lot of other concerns. So, again, just trying to put some data, make concrete of some of the statements, we've been talking about here. In terms of, I think a question that we got from the audience, thank you, Tony Olivo, for Brett and Aram, the full cost, again, I don't know what the cost of your technology is. NREL, he is saying, is estimating it to be about $350 a kilowatt hour at some point, and then, reducing from there. Are you guys competitive with lithium ion? You've talked a lot about your own financial analysis. Just curious what you're seeing internally and on what dimensions. So maybe Brett first, and then Aram.
I would say definitely, Ben. It obviously depends on applications too, right? When it comes to competitiveness, right? If you pit us against a 1 hour lithium battery for, frequency regulation only, right? That's a case, and this is to echo something Aram said earlier, there are cases where lithium is very suited, right? But then as you get into those longer duration applications, you get to 4 hours or more, that's when we really start becoming very competitive. And I think something that's worth noting is this isn't just a CapEx consideration, this is also an OpEx consideration. So one big difference and one big advantage that we at EOS have is our OpEx is lower than lithium's in a lot of cases, right? So our auxiliary load is lower because while lithium has to have, extensive fire suppression, HVAC to account for all the risk of fire, as a non-flammable technology, we don't need that. We have some very simple fans, but our aux load is far lower. With a fairly low degradation, you're looking at a system where augmentation is also going to be cheaper over the long-term life of the system. So, a lot of the questions in this way always look at CapEx, but that's not the whole story, right? Because these are assets that you're looking, you're looking to deploy them for 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Got it.
And just to build off of that, first, I'm going to respectfully disagree with my friends at NREL. I don't believe that's an accurate cost on an installed basis for lithium, precisely for some of the reasons that Brett outlined. The parasitics to keep the battery safe, fire rings, fire suppression systems, cooling. These are not required for our systems. There's nothing toxic, flammable, explosive in our battery. In fact, our battery likes the heat. Every time you cycle it, you're generating an exothermic reaction inside the tanks that achieves an optimal operating temperature between 40 to 48 degrees centigrade. But this leads into an interesting discussion. Where do we compare on cost? And I think this is an interesting visual here and demonstrates that the marginal cost of adding duration for the iron flow battery, there really is no comparison with lithium. You can see on the screen here, the LCOS at 4 hours versus 12 hours. This is at scale, but to put it in practical terms, for our utility scale solution, the marginal cost of going from, say, 8 hours to 12 hours is simply adding more electrolyte into that tank that was sized for 12 hours. And the marginal cost of that electrolyte is roughly $20 per kilowatt hour. And lithium just can't match that. They would have to continue to stack cells, and you're looking at $200+ per kilowatt hour to go from, say, 4 to 6 to 7, 8, 9, 10, and out.
Got it. Thank you. Michael, turning back to you, at what point, and again, I don't know where you are in your grid studies or how you think about it, but to the extent that you're thinking about, yes, we will really need long duration storage by this year, I'm interested in, what's the time horizon? What are you seeing? And what is your kind of best guess at this point in time?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ben. You're setting me up. There's really no gas at this point. I mean, you got to also realize most RTOs have huge excess reserve margins. So you look at a typical co-op, they are probably long baseload and peaking gas capacity, which is right in the wheelhouse of flow batteries. I mean, they're very similar technologies. So I can't speak. I think Tom made the joke, but he can't speak on behalf of Duke. I can't speak on the cooperatives, but to give you kind of the flippant but somewhat funny response, as slow as possible. I mean, we've got assets in the field that are maybe 20 years old. Like, think if you're a Texas co-op and you built the bulk of your combined cycles in, say, the big bursts that happened between 2000 and 2007. So those units, you look back and you go, okay, at most they're 20 years old. They should be able to run really well for at least another 3 decades, right? So I don't see most of our owners being crazy about mothballing those units, taking $1 billion write-down, and then buying flow batteries, to be really honest. And so I think we're going to go about this as carefully as we can. I mean, one of the speakers talked about it earlier. In some sense, I think on the load side, we're all in a bit of shock and awe stage, right? We went through the whole coal era. In the 70s, we went through the nuclear generation. That was, God's gift to technology. We adopted that. It was an expensive story. Early 2000s, we all got into natural gas. It was half the carbon output of coal. So everybody, all the environmentalists yelled, hallelujah, we're all going to adopt gas. It's clean. And I think it was Tom was talking about earlier. I think one of the problems we have in our industry is generation technologies, particularly baseload, last 50 to 60 years. But the quickness and the pace at which the regulators and the politicians are upending our industry are more like 5 to 10 years, 5 to 20 years. So what happens is every time we adopt a technology, we get chop block, and suddenly there's a new technology. So unsurprisingly, 15 years ago, we had to do wind. Then we had to do solar, and we've adopted all these things en masse. So, that's kind of a big, broad view, but, all of us, Duke included, we're sitting on tens of billions of dollars of stranded assets. Everybody has suddenly decided climate change is maybe the next best thing. So we're cautiously, to be really blunt, we're cautiously looking at that. We already have fantastic gas technology that can do many of these things. And so if you ask the industry, what would you like to blow up? I mean, it's like what Obama did with cash for clunkers, right? You destroy a huge amount of cars in the US and then you say that's victory because we're creating economic jobs. So a question I guess I'd have for panelists and for everybody in the US is, do we really want to do this with our generation technology? We have a lot of coal in the US, we have a lot of natural gas, we have, like Arm and Brett pointed out, we have a lot of lead, zinc, iron. We can mine this stuff. I mean, we met with ESS a week ago. Their technology is amazing. It can all be made in the US. And so I think these technologies, they've got a great ramp ahead of them, but you're going to get the same answer from everybody who's long gas generation. And that is, why are you asking me to destroy a beautiful technology that doesn't actually produce a lot of carbon and almost no other greenhouse gases? They will come back to you on that. That's a big issue for Congress, for the states. It's an issue facing all of us. But I think, I wouldn't be telling you the truth if we're honest enough to say we're reluctant to go crazy on this. I think what we want to do is start buying flow batteries like we're doing with lithium-ion, couple it with solar, start playing with the technology, get our feet wet, understand the technology, so that when in 5 or 10 years we have to adopt this, instead of in 10 or 50 or 100 megawatt increments, we're starting to talk about a gigawatt here, a gigawatt there. We know what we're buying. We know how it's going to fit our load shape and our transmission network. Sorry, that's a long answer.
No, but I think
No, that's fine.
it's a fair answer. And we as technology providers and equipment manufacturers are certainly sensitive to that, which is why when we look at the broad universe of incentives that hopefully will make their way out of Congress, those aren't incentives necessarily for us. They're incentives for our customers to sort of buy down your risk of being a part of that energy transition.
Got it. Thank you, Arm. Tom Fenmore, I haven't picked on you in a while. I'm interested if you might just pick up on what Michael was talking about and just the inherent challenge in all of this, particularly, taking on new technologies. I mean, that is the kind of living, breathing definition of why you have Mount Holly.
Yeah.
And so just interesting if you can talk about that process, talk about Mount Holly, what you do there, and how then it goes from Mount Holly to the kind of broader Duke system and wider adoption.
Yeah. So I am blessed in that I probably have the coolest job in Duke Energy, right? So I get to be the entry point for a lot of new technologies that come into the company. I say my team does, my emerging technology team. So at Mount Holly, we have a fully operational microgrid where we basically stay islanded, disconnected from the grid, running on solar and battery resources and natural gas resources for roughly 90% of the time. And that microgrid's been in operation since 2015. We are on our third generation of battery technology at that site. Because we cycle our batteries 3 to 4 times a day, we're able to basically accelerate, the life cycle testing on the equipment, and we're giving that as direct feedback to the Duke Energy business. I'll just give you a real world example. We had a piece of switchgear that was required, to do the switching for the microgrid that we were operating with. And we operated that piece of switchgear for about 4 years. We were starting to see some failures in the switchgear, and we contacted the manufacturer and was asked by the manufacturer how many cycles we had on the particular pieces of the contactors that were creating problems. They were motorized contactors. We actually went out and read the contactors, and we had almost 7,000 cycles on those contactors, which amazed the vendor, and that the vendor said, our typical specifications for that piece of equipment are about 2,000 cycles. And here we had cycled that piece of equipment roughly 7,000 times in a period of about 4 years because of the way we operate our microgrid. They were pleased as punch that we had, had that piece of equipment last that long. We were thrilled. However, we weren't so thrilled in that we found out that we were going to have to make another investment in a piece of switchgear or another piece of switchgear to replace it. But these are the kinds of things that we're uncovering as we go down this path of connecting and disconnecting from the grid, bringing all of these assets into play and making them operate with solar and battery and grid connected and not grid connected. I think to add to the story of the challenge that we've got in front of us, is that we have these other, what I call balance of plant systems that we have to understand how we're going to operate and how we're going to, integrate and make as reliable as our existing generation assets. We've been talking about battery technology primarily during this discussion, which in and of itself is a great discussion. But, what we have found by and large in our journey of actually testing the battery technologies is that the battery technology and chemistry itself really, at the end of the day, works. Where we have found our vast amount of problems is around the systems that surround that: communication systems, control systems, power supplies, as I had mentioned, switch gear, so all of the stuff that it takes to integrate this into, a system that works on the grid, really has its own set of challenges. So, I think there's a lot of work that we need to do there yet to fully understand that. So that's why I think there's a big interest. And one of the things that we're looking at is, when we get to these plant scale systems, to where we have basically gigawatt scale systems that look like and operate like a power plant, we have a workforce that's ready to drop into place to support them. And the understanding of these high temperature, high pressure, mechanical type systems, very similar to flow, that's out there, are readily supportable. When we start to get into more of these exotic systems that have a lot of, very high maintenance requirements and, really exotic technologies associated with them, I've got some real concerns about the long-term reliability and availability of those technologies. So, we're taking these learnings that we have at Mount Holly around these, interactions and the testing that we're doing. And then we do a tech transfer over into the business. We do a tech transfer with our engineering teams. We do a tech transfer over into our planning teams so that they're aware of this information and that we can kind of integrate it into our strategy as we go forward. So as I've mentioned several times, this is a journey. I'm not sure quite where we are in that journey just yet, but we're working with our planners to understand what our milestones are, and we're determining. We actually have some projects right now, some pretty good sized projects. We're evaluating 2 or 3 different technologies so that in a year or two, we can actually make a choice of which technologies we're ready to deploy.
Can you, without getting into anything confidential, and I just want to be very clear there, can you talk a little bit about the milestones or the technologies that are kind of like, leaders in the clubhouse, or, you mentioned flow batteries, for example, like Honeywell, or others that you're looking to test? So I guess there are 2 questions. Like, one is, what are your milestones? What do you see in the future? And then 2 is, how are you thinking about, just the kind of, next batch of tests, the next kinds of batteries you're going to be testing, and the challenges that or the workouts you're going to be giving them, I guess.
Sure. So as I mentioned, we're deploying an Eos battery at Mount Holly as the main microgrid battery. Because I really want to, understand that technology operating in a 24/7 environment that's got to, stay online around the clock. Because in order for me or my team to recommend to our folks, to deploy that at multi megawatt scale, we've got to have confidence that we can operate around the clock with the technology. So, that's one small test we're entering into. But we have projects that we're actively looking at, deployments of that kind of chemistry, that are kind of on the 2024, 2025 timeframe. So if I look at it today, Ben, to try and look at it from a scaling perspective and put some numbers around it, today we're looking at, hundreds and hundreds of kW and 5 to 10 megawatt scale type testing and installations. That really is going to kind of get scaled up in the 2025 timeframe ish, for a round number, to systems that are going to be in the 6-hour duration range of storage that are going to be in the 10 to 100 megawatt scale, right? And they're going to be look more like a peaker type plant. And then in 2030, for another round number, we're going to need plant scale technology to be deployable, okay, to where we're going to be able to get to gigawatt scale. So, that's kind of the information that I can share that we sort of have on a roadmap right now. I'm not hearing you. Are you muted?
I'm absolutely muted. Yeah, still can't learn WebEx. I swear in the next 5 minutes I'll master it. So back to Aram and Brett. I mean, what is the kind of final duration, or when we talk about long duration, right? We've been still kind of on the shorter end, right? We've still been in the kind of 6 to 8 hour range. I mean, is that going to be the right amount? I mean, what about? I'm gonna say this because I think it'll provoke some good conversation, but like what if Texas happens again, right? How do we have enough storage over 3 days, 4 days, 5 days? And again, I know that that's like an insanely flippant comment because Texas is more complicated, but it's something probably the kind of audience recognizes, right? Is like, how do we get to 3 multi-day storage versus like hourly? And how do we think about when multi-day storage is necessary, right? Obviously at the outer bands of the tail, but that has to be a consideration as well.
Yeah.
So maybe Brett, then Aram, if that works.
Sure. Yeah, that works. So Ben, it's a very good question. And I think this goes back to something that Aram and I have both said, which is, every technology in the storage market has its niche, right? Lithium, very good up to 4 hours. Technology like Eos, ESS, other similar technologies, really good, 4 to 12. But then when you get into kind of the multi-day storage, it becomes a very different conversation, right? Then you have to think about things like, green hydrogen, or, these types of like very early stage type of storage solutions that, I don't think anyone's really figured out yet, or even gotten close to, frankly. But I think, it becomes a question of kind of what do we need, right? Because, and, there's been dozens of studies about this, and I don't want to just quote numbers off the top of my head, but, there's different studies that say things like, this grid can get up to X percentage renewable before we need, this many hours of available storage. And, really the number tends to be quite high. You don't really need multi-day storage until you get to the very high end of renewables penetration. But I think it's a good question. I think it's a valid question. But again, I think, it's all about figuring out what tools we have to face what solutions. And I think definitely today, there already is very clearly a need for 4 hour and increasingly beyond storage. But I don't know of any consistent region on Earth today where there's a need for multi-day storage, right? It'll come, but I don't think there's cases where, some country that's like, we already have, or we already need, 3 full days of storage, or the lights aren't going to be on.
Right. Okay. And we'll leave form out of this as well. So that's fine. Good. Aram, your reaction as well, and then we'll keep going.
No, I would agree. We clearly believe that the market incentives are there today for 8 to 12 hours of duration at rated power. That's really, especially at 12 hours is where you get to solar as a more reliable baseload generation source. In terms of the whole discussion around seasonal storage, I would generally agree with Brett. There are a lot of interesting ideas. None of them have really made it out of the lab just yet. And I would flip it a little bit and say, give me the bankability argument that makes the case for 3, 4, 5 days of storage right now in any given market. I mean, for us, the bankability proof point, certainly is in that 8 to 12 hour range. And for us, anyway, we can back that up with an investment grade warranty by global reinsurer Munich Re that provides a 10-year extended warranty coverage for our battery modules and our EHMS. And increasingly, we're, paired with that instrument, we're seeing a lot of developers and utilities saying, oh, okay, let's start rethinking modeling in a universe beyond just 4 hours and look at how we can deploy solar as a baseload generating asset with long duration batteries that can deliver up to 12 hours at rated power.
Got it. Great. If there are any other questions from the audience, we'd love to take them now. We know we're coming up to the end of the event. We also know it is 2:12 on a Friday afternoon. And so, David, I'm looking to you. We can certainly just have some closing thoughts from each of the panelists, or if you have any questions yourself you want to ask, really, we can be flexible and go either way. So David, just asking you about where do you want us to go next?
Yeah, Ben, your format did just really an excellent job of covering the various questions I think that our audience have, and I have also. So I think if you were to just offer your panelists an opportunity to take a minute or two and just kind of reflect generally on where they see the industry going in the next year or two, and really what their advice is for those that are in the audience right now as to what they could expect and what they might do to further the industry.
Great. So let's try and think about who to start with. Let's go to Brett and Aram first as the technology providers, and then Michael and Tom can bring it home.
Sure. Look, Aram, you can go first. I think I went first last time. Oh, I think you might be muted.
I'm still learning to use this.
I think we all are.
I was having a great conversation with myself, guys, but so what's on the horizon here? I think a couple things. One, longer duration, because that provides the flexibility and allows for multiple revenue streams. Lower costs, particularly on the total cost of ownership or levelized cost of storage, than what I would call the incumbent technologies. 3, an increased focus on safety and reliability. Both of the technology providers you have on this panel today offer non-flammable, non-toxic, and no explosion risk. I would say bankability. We touched a bit upon the Munich Re coverage that we're able to provide. And then finally, and this is driven largely by consumer preference and mandates, is sustainability. I think you're going to see a big push for stationary batteries connected to our grid to be batteries that rely on easily sourced materials, are largely recyclable, and have that minimum design life of 20 to 25 years.
Thanks. Brett?
Sure. Yeah, those are all great points. I think these are things that we need to think about a lot critically. I think the safety question especially is one that is more pertinent now than ever. I've been in this industry since 2015, and I think there were more major stationary lithium fire events that I know of in the last year than I think there were in the entire time from 2015 to about 2020. So, obviously they're one-off incidents, but still the safety point is one that increasingly comes up as we're talking to clients, and one that I think is pretty important. I also think, as we look ahead, this market is just continuing to scale, and it's really a global market. There are, we've talked a lot about the US today, which makes a lot of sense, but there's needs all over the world and in all sorts of economies. Eos has done projects in the US, but we've also done projects in India, Nigeria. We're finishing installing one in Greece right now. So it's, really there is this opportunity globally to really improve customer outcomes, improve reliability, improve safety, reduce costs for everyone with these technologies, which I think is quite exciting. And just the last thing I'll say is, keep an eye on what's going on in Washington right now. Aram talked about it earlier, but the storage ITC, is, it hasn't passed yet, but it's more real than it's ever been. And, if and when it does go through, that's going to have some really exciting implications for what can happen with this industry and how we can scale to the next paradigm.
Great. Thank you, Brett, Michael, and Tom.
Yeah, just to follow up with what Brett was saying, I think if you're asking for immediate ideas, that I think makes sense. The standalone storage ITC is a slam dunk. I don't know why we haven't done it. I mean, if we're going to subsidize everything, why wouldn't we be subsidizing batteries? I mean, it's kind of funny. You grew up in Canada and you're always told Americans are socialists or capitalists. And I've moved down here the last 20 something years and quickly figured out you guys are socialist Canadians because everybody likes subsidies and tax credits. And, kind of being facetious, but the reality is, we subsidize everything but batteries. And if climate change and zero carbon is our goal, we have to make these early adopters be able to dip our toes in the pond. And to reiterate what Tom said, I mean, we're excited about the technology. I think if Congress can help us all to start adopting this technology and getting used to it, because it is complicated. We've done a whole bunch of lithium-ion batteries. To echo what Tom said, they haven't really performed as well as we thought. It's a lot like buying a recip engine. There fits and starts. There's a lot of issues beyond just the battery and the integration into the system. So the technology is amazingly complicated. I think we have to get on this technology as soon as possible. I guess that's what I'm getting at. I think we need to all start embracing it. We need to get flow batteries on our systems because there's a big learning curve. I really think we shouldn't muck around for a few more years and kind of wonder if this is going to go away or we're going to go another direction. I mean, it's the same thing you can say about advanced nuclear, green hydrogen, and carbon capture, utilization, and storage. All these technologies need to be explored further and quickly, and we're all for it.
Thank you, Michael. Tom?
Yeah, I think one thing, echoing what folks have said, and one thing we need to add to that is, look, we've got an incredible knowledge base of people that operate our systems today. Let's not ignore them in this conversation, right? These are the guys and the girls that operate these systems on a day in and day out basis. They've got a knowledge base that can really contribute to this journey. And we need to take advantage of that knowledge base. So let's get out from in front of our computer. Let's put our boots and our hard hat on. Let's go out, buy an iced tea for the folks that are out there operating these systems that we've got, operating our distribution lines, our transmission lines, our power plants. Let's learn from them what works and what doesn't, and take that information into account as we plan for this stuff going forward.
Great. Thank you. This has been awesome. I know it's now it's Friday at 2:20, almost 2:30. If you live in Charlotte, it's golf weather year round, which is awesome. So I apologize if I'm keeping anyone from that. So David, I'll quickly toss it back to you for concluding thoughts, and also really just want to thank the panelists for a great conversation. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Ben, thank you. Aaron, Brett, Michael, Tom, exceptionally well done. And if you are going to golf, sunsets at 5:15. You got time for 9 holes, so head for it. So just to reflect on the day for a moment. Holy cow! I deal with these issues every day. It's my job. I am just saturated after listening. And probably the thing that I come back to is Bill Brown's comment. Statistically, he didn't make this up. He got this from authoritative sources. $8 billion a day of capital spend between now and 2050 to truly attain net zero operation. So there's billions of dollars to be spent on hydrogen development, on advanced nuclear technology development, on long duration storage development, on consuming technologies, on infrastructure, on renewables. And all of you that are still with us, I would encourage you, do not be on the sidelines for 1 minute, not for a minute. This is an all hands on deck, and this is more opportunity. And I've been in the energy industry for 41 years, and there is more opportunity out there for energy professionals right now than at any time that I've observed. So those of you that are listening, if you're not directly involved in heading us towards net zero operation, get with it, and let's get going. Thank you all for being with us. I'm going to remind you E4 Carolina's events page. We have an event coming up on Monday. It's about a 2-hour or less seminar. It's going to focus exclusively on 8 Rivers Capital net zero development. Jess Buchanan just put the link into the chat function. I will note again that we have captured every one of the chat questions, and we will disaggregate those by panel. We'll set them off to the panel member with a copy to everyone who posed the question so that we can get all of those resolved. I'll also mention that when you go to our events page, we have our first in-person conference that we'll produce in Greenville, South Carolina, December 9th and 10th. First time in 18 months we'll be together in person. Take advantage of that one. With that, again, I thank all of the panelists. I thank all of you who have been with us all day as participants. And a special call out to the Rock Hill Virtual Academy High School and Susan Fields. Thank you for bringing your students to share this with them. Thank you all. Oh, and by the way, let me just mention that to the extent we have speaker permissions on the PowerPoint decks and eventually on the videos, everyone who is registered for this conference will subsequently receive a compilation of the decks and also links to the various videos. Thank you all for being with us. Hope you have a great weekend. Be safe.
Thank you, David, for the opportunity. Really great session.